Welcome back to room 303 in Junior English, and we now turn in our continued study of Arthur Miller's play Crucible, The Crucible, to pages 1160, 1161 and following. We are now in Act 2 of The Crucible, and our first place to study or to go is on page 1160. Let's continue with our annotative work at 2B, and let's write down some important information. This kind of intel is going to end up on the exam, and it also helps us to be able to prep for the next act and study of the next act. Conflict, write it down. Conflict is a struggle between opposing forces. There are two broad categories of conflict. In a complex narrative like this play, there are often numerous conflicts, and most characters experience both types. Two types, let's write it down. External conflict takes place between a character and an external force, such as society, nature, fate, another person. In Act 2, for example, as accusations and hysteria mount in Salem, characters face increasingly dangerous external conflicts with their neighbors, Abigail, and the other accusing girls, and the authorities as well. An internal conflict, number 2, make sure it's written down, takes place within a character who is torn by his or her own competing or contradictory values or desires. In Act 2, deepening external threats create new internal conflicts for characters and magnify those that already exist. Okay. Some of the conflicts in this play arise out of the stern religious worldviews that defines the Salem community. We've talked about this before, that Calvinist Puritan view. That worldview is not only revealed through characters' actions and descriptions of their lifestyles, it is also revealed through, let's write this down, biblical allusions or references to figures, stories, or settings from the Bible. These biblical allusions remind characters and readers of, and I would say viewers, of the religious beliefs on which the Puritan community is based. As you read, notice the conflicts that intensify in Act 2 and the biblical allusions that help characters to define, defend, and excuse their actions. For your reading strategy here for Act 2, as you read, help yourself stay alert to important details and changes in characters and situations by making predictions about what will happen next. Notice hints the author drops about what might occur, and apply your own background knowledge and understanding of human nature. As you read, use the chart like the one to the right. And then the vocabulary at the bottom of the page there, make sure that you have that. 1161, let's review and anticipate. As Act 1 draws to a close, Salem is in the grip of mounting hysteria. What had begun as concern over the strange behavior of Betty, a reaction that may have stemmed from guilty feelings about her activities in the woods the night before, had swelled by the act's end to a mass hysteria in which accusations of witchcraft were being made and accepted against a growing number of Salem's citizens. What characters do you think will believe the accusations? Who do you think will be accused next? This is part of that prediction stuff. All right, let's talk it through really quickly. Act 2. Act 2, we're going to join the proctors. Okay. In the first act, we're introduced to the insanity that is this town and the negative energy that is this town. And then finally, we end Act 1 with this whole thing about I saw the devil, so-and-so trafficked with the devil, and I saw so-and-so and all of that. As Tituba and Abigail kind of lead the charge there. We now shift the focus. And in Act 2, the prism or the lens is going to now shift to John and Elizabeth Proctor. Okay. Right away they are discussing the hysteria in Salem. Elizabeth is concerned, and she urges John to tell the court that Abigail is a liar. They argue over his infidelity. One of the problems is going to be John Proctor has to admit to his wife that he was alone with Abigail when Abigail gave that information. Now, technically, he wasn't alone, right? Because Betty was laying in the bed, distract. But he was, for all intents and purposes, he was alone. And the tension between the two then will heighten as Reverend Hale shows up. He's going to arrive. He's going to question the proctors to discover whether they are good Christians. Some of their answers are unorthodox, but Hale is impressed with their honesty. However, Cheever and Herrick then enter with a warrant for Elizabeth's arrest. So let's put it in our notes right away. The second act is going to end with John Proctor's wife being taken away in chains. Now, one of the things that's significant is that Mary Warren will have given a little doll, puppet it's called, to Elizabeth. And a needle is stuck in its stomach, in the belly of the doll, because that's, she was sewing it or whatever. But they find the doll with the needle in its belly and explain that Abigail was stabbed in the belly with a needle and blamed it on Elizabeth's spirit. Now, it's pretty easy from the outside looking in to see what's going down here, right? Elizabeth is accused of witchcraft by Abigail. Question: why would Abigail want that? Answer: Abigail wants Elizabeth dead so that she can then legitimately marry John Proctor. It's kind of simple. Abigail's got a problem. If John Proctor will not leave his wife to run off with Abigail, then Abigail will solve the problem by simply killing John Proctor's wife. Now, it's interesting, and we'll get into this debate in the second act. It's clear John Proctor does not fully appreciate the extent to which Abigail Williams is ready to do what she's going to do to get her man or keep her man or whatever. Although Mary does confess to giving the doll to Elizabeth, she's like, yeah, I gave it. Mary does not completely comprehend what Abigail is willing to do to get John back. The officials take Elizabeth away in handcuffs. Proctor threatens to expose Abigail unless Mary confesses that the accusations of witchcraft are lies. And at the very end of Act 2, then, we're going to see John Proctor, who is set on the end of a serious dilemma. Does he expose himself to save his wife, right, and go in front of the now developed court? We're going to have a court now that's brought in that will begin the whole process. All right, let's read together on 1161. We're in Act 2. The common room of Proctor's house, 8 days later. So write this down. It's now been a week, okay, since the insanity of the last act. At the right is a door opening on the fields outside. A fireplace is at the left. Behind it, a stairway leading upstairs. It's the low, dark, and rather long living room of the time. As the curtain rises, the room is empty. From above, Elizabeth is heard softly singing to the children. Presently, the door opens. John Proctor enters carrying his gun. He glances about the room as he comes toward the fireplace, then halts for an instant as he hears her singing. He continues on to the fireplace, leans the gun against the wall as he swings a pot out of the fire and smells it. Then he lifts out the ladle and tastes. He's not quite pleased. He reaches to a cupboard, takes a pinch of salt, drops it into the pot. As he is tasting again, her footsteps are heard on the stairs. He swings the pot into the fireplace, goes to a basin, washes his hands and face, and Elizabeth will then enter. Okay? So you're going to have an exchange now between husband and wife. Now, again, just for our notes, let's write this down. We already know information about John Proctor. What we don't know about is his wife. This will be our first time to see his wife. You'll remember, however, we've heard about her because Abigail Williams 2 different times made negative comments about John Proctor's wife, calling her sniveling, calling her controlling, which will beg the question, is any of what Abigail said, do you find at all mirrored or true in the way in which Goody Proctor will respond to her husband? Now, let's remind ourselves, John Proctor slept with Abigail. Goody Proctor found out and confronted him. He admitted it. She fired Abigail as their servant. Mary Warren is going to be the replacement. And obviously, you got some serious tension going on in this marriage between these two. The obvious question is a question of trust. Let's go ahead and continue at the level 2A. This is one of the major themes of our play. Who are you going to trust? An extension of that deception theme, as we mentioned it already. All right, here we go. We're back now to our study together. Let's just kind of follow along and watch again as these two kind of start to have a conversation that ends in a bit of a fight. What's the source of the fight? Let's pay attention. Again, 1161.
What keeps you so late, John? Almost dark.
We're planting right out to the forest edge.
Oh, you're done then.
Aye, the farm is seeded. The boys asleep?
I will be soon.
I think we'll see green fields soon. It's warm as blood beneath the clouds.
Oh, it's well.
If the crop is good, I'll buy George Jacobs heifer. How would that please you?
Aye, it will.
I mean to please you, Elizabeth.
I know it, John.
On Sunday, let you come with me and we'll walk the farm together. I never see such a load of...
1162.
Massachusetts is a beauty in the spring.
Aye, it is.
I think you're sad again, are you?
You come so late, I thought you'd gone to Salem this afternoon.
Why, I have no business in Salem.
Oh, you did speak of going earlier
I
this week.
thought better of it since.
Mary Warren's there today.
Why'd you let her? You heard me. Forbid her go to Salem anymore.
I couldn't stop.
It is a fault. It is a fault, Elizabeth. You're the mistress of the house here, not Mary Warren.
1163.
How may that mouse frighten you, Elizabeth?
It is a mouse no more. I forbid her go. And she raises up her chin like the daughter of a prince and says to me, I must go to Salem, Goody Proctor. I am an official of the court.
Court? What court?
Aye, it is a proper court they have now. They've sent 4 judges out of Boston, she says. Weighty magistrates of the general court. And at the head sits the deputy governor of the province.
Why, she's mad.
Would to God she were. There'll be 14 people in the jail now, she says. And they'll be tried, and the court have power to hang them too, she said.
Oh, they never hang them.
The deputy governor promised hanging if they'll not confess, John. The town's gone wild, I think. She speak of Abigail, and I thought she were a saint to hear her. Abigail brings the other girls into the court. Folks are brought before them, and if they scream and howl and fall to the floor, the person's clapped into jail for bewitching them. I think you must go to Salem, John. You must tell them it is a fraud.
Aye, it is surely.
Let you go to Ezekiel Cheever. He knows you well. And tell him what Abigail said to you last week in her uncle's house. She said it had naught to do with witchcraft, did she?
Aye, she did.
God forbid you keep that from the court, John. I think they must be told.
Aye, they must. It is a wonder they do believe her.
I will go to Salem now, John. Let you go tonight.
I'll think on it.
You cannot keep it, John.
I know I cannot keep it. I say I will think on it.
Good then. Let you think of it.
I am only wondering how I may prove what she told me, Elizabeth. If the girl's a saint...
Top of cell 1164.
To prove she's fraud and the town gone so silly. She told it to me in a room alone.
Uh-oh.
I have no proof for it.
You were alone.
For a moment alone,
It's not as you
For a
tell.
moment, I say. The others come in soon after.
Do as you wish.
Woman, I'll not have your suspicion anymore.
Then let you not earn it.
You doubt me yet?
John, if it were not Abigail that you must go to have it, would you falter now?
Tough question.
Now look, you Elizabeth.
I see what I see, John.
You will not judge me more, Elizabeth. Let you look to your own improvement before you go to judge your husband anymore. I have forgot Abigail.
And I...
Spare me, you forget nothing and forgive nothing. Learn charity, woman. Still an everlasting funeral march around your heart. I cannot speak, but I am doubted. Every movement judged for life.
You are not open with me. You saw her with me. You saw her with the crowd. You said
I'll plead my honesty no more, Elizabeth.
John, I am only...
No more! I should have roared you down when first you told me your suspicion, but I willed it, and like a Christian, I confessed. Some dream I had must have mistaken you for God that day. But you're not. You're not, and let you remember it. Let you look sometimes for the goodness in me and judge me not.
I do not judge you. The magistrate sits in your heart that judges you. I never thought you but a good man, John, only somewhat bewildered.
Oh, Elizabeth, your justice would freeze beer.
Now, of course, this is a compelling scene. And Miller has the ability to create this kind of tension between the two. Notice that it begins, first of all, by just them talking about the insanity of what's going on now in Salem. Notice that we're back to, at the very beginning, let's just turn back to 1162, 1163. On 1163, notice that Goody Proctor says, I tried to tell Mary Warren that she wasn't allowed to go to Salem. She didn't listen to me. So let's write this in your notes right away. We're already starting to see some cracks in the foundation, to use a metaphor that's coming with Reverend Hale. The idea here is that Goody Proctor is already losing control of her family, of her household. She can't even tell her servant what to do. And then she mentions that there's a court. And it's interesting that Proctor says court What court? Now again, how many days? A week, 8 days, right? What does it tell you that John Proctor doesn't know that there's 14 people who are now sitting waiting to be judged and condemned? He's shocked by this. He's like, what are you talking about? Tells you something, right? What's it tell you? John Proctor has kept to his own. He's been doing his own work. We're told that he's been seeding the field. Note the irony of that line, right? The field now has all of its seed in it. This is kind of Miller's forecasting of, hey, heads up, we're about to see some crazy that will happen. In a line from Shakespeare's Hamlet, a 3A observation. Foul deeds will rise, though all the earth o'erwhelm them to men's eyes. That is to say, you can take seed and throw it in a field and cover the dirt. Sooner or later, stuff's going to grow, and we're about to see all of that come to its full fruition. Notice, he can't believe it. He says, in fact, ironically, they'd never hang. Are you kidding me? No. Notice it's Elizabeth who will say it on page 1163. The town's gone wild, I think. So notice the shift here. It's a very subtle one, but let's put it in our notes already. Notice in the first act, it's the town is silly. Notice in the second act, it's the town is wild. So we're one step now beyond it. Next, notice she says, I think you must go to Salem, John. I think so. You must tell them this is a fraud. Now this is, of course, where the tension starts to heat up. This is one of the problems with reading the play that you don't have when you watch the play. Because as Elizabeth says to him, dude, you need to go to Salem and fix this, you can kind of see across John Proctor's face growing internal conflict. Let's put it down at level 2B. This is the beginnings of some serious conflict for John Proctor. Why? Well, he says it. You know, she says it, God forbid that you should keep that from the court, John. I think they must be told. In other words, she says it, John, you have an obligation. Honey, you got to go. You got to fix this problem. Jot down in your notes, why is John having serious problems with going to the court? Why doesn't he just walk into the court and say, hey, I know that Mary told me this is all a joke, that it's a fraud. First problem, top of page 1164, says it right out loud. I was alone with her. Immediately Elizabeth picks up on this. Now why should she be concerned about this? I mean, I've had junior students and say, totally understand this, because if I ever messed around with my girlfriend and she found out, and then I swore that it never would happen again, and she found out that I was at a party with that very same girl, it wouldn't matter. There's always suspicion. Notice Elizabeth says, you said you were alone? Or you were alone with her? You didn't tell me this part. That then leads to the tough question. Notice Elizabeth asks it. John, if it were not Abigail that you must go to her, would you falter now? I think not. Whoa! What is being suggested here by Elizabeth without her coming right out and saying it? What is she really saying? You're still in love with, you got it, Abigail, right? Still in love with Abigail, aren't you? What's going on? What's going on, John? John's response is to get mad. Question, why do you think he gets mad? Is it because he feels falsely accused? Or is it because he knows she's right? If it wasn't Abigail and it was somebody else, he would go. But because it's Abigail, he won't go, right? Notice he says, judge me. You will not judge me more, Elizabeth. Right? I have good reason to think before I charge fraud on Abigail, and I will think on it. Let you look to your own improvement before you go to judge your husband anymore. I have forgot Abigail. And Elizabeth says, so have I. And Proctor says, spare me. You forget nothing and forgive nothing. I'm on page 1164. You forget nothing and forgive nothing. And then he says it to her. Learn charity, woman. Whoa, what's he say to her? What's his point here? Yeah, right. It's like, what did Abigail say about Goody Proctor? She's a sniveling woman. She's not a good person. And John here is going to say, don't be mean to me anymore. Of course, here's the irony. Proctor's the one that messed around with Abigail. So obviously his wife has every reason to be a little bit concerned, if not suspicious, about him, right? He says, I cannot speak, but I am doubted, every moment judged for lies, as though I am come into a court when I come into this house. Note the irony. In other words, if we have a large court trying to figure out if there's witchcraft going on in Salem, he says, my house is like a court where my wife is constantly trying to find out if I'm guilty still or not. Notice it's Elizabeth that says, you were not open with me. Note the use of the word open again, just like Abigail used it before. You saw her with a crowd, you said. Now, Proctor says, I'll plead my honesty no more, Elizabeth. No more. Right? John, I'm only, she says. Proctor says, no more. I should have roared you down when first you told me your suspicion. What does roared you down mean? How do you read that line? Do you read that line as I should have lied and not confessed? I should have, but I wilted, and like a Christian, I confessed. Some dream I had must have mistaken you for God that day, but you're not, and let you remember it. Let you look sometimes for the goodness in me, and judge me not. All this legal language, which is of course fascinating, because here in a few seconds, where will she be taken? You got it, away to the court, right? Notice that Elizabeth says, I do not judge you. The magistrate sits in your heart that judges you. Now, we cannot miss these lines, guys. These are really important lines for the overall significance of the play. Later in the play, we already know this because we've dealt with plot summary. Later in the play, John himself will be in front of that court, and he will have to decide whether he actually tells the full truth or not. The irony of all ironies will be, he does tell the truth,